Thank you, Tamara. And here is Pika, also our third in the pen panel. Her paper, titled Bhakti as Yoga, Traces of Devotional Transformation in 17th-century Bengal, takes us to a particular specific site. Pika is Associate Professor of Art History at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And her area of interest and focus is many things to do with Bengal. So, Pika.
Thanks, Deborah, for inviting me to this fabulous opportunity to think about yoga in a way I confess I haven't in my work before. The image of Krishna as flute player that dominates popular imagery today tends to obscure his identity as Maha Yogi, master of yoga, elaborated in such early texts as the 2nd century Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. However, these two aspects of the divine, irresistible, charming, human, intimate, and the absolute, transcendental, ascetic, were never incompatible. The Gita, for example, aligns bhakti, devotional love, alongside gyan, knowledge or wisdom that relinquishes all worldly desire, and karma, sacred duty. In fact, the text has often been interpreted as guiding us into awareness of the self and its spiritual nature, the slow discovery and unfolding of one's sacred duty to yoke the self with the divine, which then culminates in total surrender of mind, heart, and body in the Lord. Likewise, the more narrative biographical account of the 10th century Bhagavad Puran juxtaposes these roles as performed by Krishna and also his entourage, suggesting that they are ultimately inseparable and integral to achieving union with the Lord. These concepts re-emerged to prominence in Mughal North India, in the upsurge of devotional love for Krishna that seemed to overtake the region, even drawing the attention of the emperors to Vrindavan in the 16th century. The Bengali saint Chaitanya advocated both the more exuberant practices of song and dance, kirtan, as well as the quiet interiority of meditation. His disciples elevated Radha, Krishna's divine consort, as model for the selfless love she had offered him in his youth, disregarding all social propriety and the stigma inevitably associated with an illicit love. Aspiring to Radha's emotional state was regarded as the highest goal, and gradually a range of practices came to be prescribed in manuals for practitioners to become Radha to reach Krishna. Bengali temples dedicated to this spiritual path to strive for balance between both sets of images and practices, in part through shared iconographic elements and physical proximity. The 17th century temples built at Bishnupur in the southwest corner of Bengal, one of the earliest local kingdoms dedicated to him, reveal experiments toward visualizing bhakti through dhyan, meditation. They display Radha and the Gopis as paradigms of yogic practice. They do so through size, repetition, and location on the temple walls. Relief panels attempt to visualize and hence externalize the kind of interior images and experiences that we find described prolifically in the Bhagavad Puran, the 12th century songs of the Gita Govinda, and subsequently Chaitanya's biographies. Thus, temples relegate the imagery of male ascetics with flying matted locks, bellies filled with prana, engaged in the performance of asanas that we may recognize today as Padmasana or Vrikshasana to locations of lesser visibility in the monuments, perhaps corresponding to the more private spaces in these temples that may have been granted to such practitioners to accommodate or even co-opt their mode of devotion and its spiritual potency in this resurgence of love for Krishna. Today I will explore the Bhakti vision of yoga that was foregrounded on the Shamrai temple, the earliest dated monument at this site, to introduce a pattern that I perceive recurring through the structures built here for over a century. Indeed, the preoccupation with giving balance to both sets of images of yoga can be identified as one of the important experiments that each temple tried to work out in both distinctive and very creative ways. Bold depictions of the Rasa Leela set Krishna's dance with the Gopis in motion on the main walls of this temple. 2 medallions flank the main public entrance, and a third fills the back of the sanctum. At center, Krishna sways to the sound of his flute, accompanied by Radha. The pair echoes the form of icons that would have been worshipped when the temple was in use. A second gopi complements Radha on the other side, and rings of dancers encircle them. Their outstretched arms, bent knees, and soaring sashes visualize the dynamic rhythm of their dance, reiterated in performances of kirtan in the temples in the evenings. If the gopis in the outer rings appear undifferentiated, the Bhagavad Puran vividly distinguishes them. And I quote, "Seeing that their beloved had returned, the women, their eyes wide with love, sprang up immediately as if the vital body and air had returned. One ecstatic woman caught hold of Krishna's lotus hand. Another placed his arm, decorated with sandal, on her shoulder. A slender woman accepted his chewed betel nut with folded hands. Another, burning with desire, placed his lotus feet on her breast. Yet another, trembling with the fury of love, was biting her lips, her brows knitted in a frown. She glared at Krishna as if she could strike him with a look of rebuke. Another woman dwelt on his lotus face with unblinking eyes. Although she drank it in with her eyes, she wasn't fully satisfied, as a saint is not fully satisfied by meditating on Krishna's lotus feet. Some other woman, drawing Krishna into her heart through the apertures of her eyes and then sealing them shut, stood embracing him in her heart like a yogi in bliss." Unquote. Their visual experiences mediate between internal and external, individual and group, reconfiguring these boundaries in multiple interconnected ways. From an initial shared response at seeing Krishna after his disappearance, they diverge into deeply personal physiological and emotional experiences, including intense, focused, meditative visualizations. While some reach to reassure themselves through physical contact, others touch him with their gaze to overcome the distance that had devastated them when he disappeared. The act of looking is a drinking in of his form. It suggests a reception of the image from outside in as liquid enters the mouth. And like a cool drink, it alleviates some of her parched state. By her very bodily process of meditating on his image, she absorbs him inside of herself. And the mental image she captures gives rise to exhilaration. Goosebumps, hair standing on end, express that thrill back again on the surface of her body. And meditation, of course, is exactly what Krishna prescribed to these gopis. Quote, love for me comes from hearing about me, seeing me, meditating upon me, not from physical proximity." Unquote. The text goes further to tell us that those who could not leave their homes did so virtually through single-minded contemplation. Such focus and the selflessness of this love daunts Krishna himself. He confesses that he cannot possibly reciprocate their devotion. The mandala can thus also be understood as visionary, a projection of desire to overcome estrangement. And it is a tool for triggering further visions among the living community. A set of 6 panels located immediately below the mandala again depicts Krishna with Radha and a second gopi. The placement relative to these large prominent medallions suggests further exploration of the Rasa Leela. Here, the individual panels present the figures frontally, as if extracting stills from a performance in motion. In turn, each panel is set in bands of vegetal ornament and indented shrines that visualize Radha and Krishna in different poses. Radha sitting on his lap, pressing his feet, the divine couple standing, almost holding hands. Sometimes Krishna's hand is on her breast, other times Krishna is departing. Together, they unfold their relationship, or a single trysting cycle maybe. Not unlike the Gita Govinda songs that are performed in sequences in such temples to this day. In my earlier work, I focused on the depictions of Radha and Krishna to examine the architecture. I interpreted the monument as double-storied, with 2 shrines, a pavilion atop the main sanctum, to argue for a viable ritual space in a new temple form. However, attending to the gopi devotee figure, who is also the beholder, opens up possibilities for reading the relief as an attempt to visualize the deep concern with interior states and emotional transformation, as in the songs, plays, hagiographical accounts, and theological treatises of this period. As the Gita Govinda gave primacy to Radha as Krishna's chosen beloved, the gopis become her friends. They are privy to her secret thoughts, her inner turmoil. They bear witness to her internal reconstruction of Krishna in his absence, and the emotions that are generated from this internal enactment. Through ekphrastic word images, the poet Jaidev conjures a vision, guiding the listener along the absent Krishna's irresistible form. And I quote, "Sweet notes from his alluring flute echo nectar from his lips. His restless eyes glance, his head sways, earrings play at his cheeks. My heart recalls Hari here in his love dance, playing seductively, laughing, mocking me. A circle of peacock plumes caressed by moonlight crowns his hair. A rainbow colors the fine cloth on his cloud-dark body. Kissing mouths of round-hipped girls whets his lust. Brilliant smiles flash from ruby-red lips. Vines of great throbbing arms circle 1,000 cowherdesses. Jewel rays from his hands and feet break the dark night. My heart recalls Hari here in his love dance." And Hari is Krishna. "Playing seductively, laughing, mocking me." So vivid is Radha's mental image that she seems to interact with it just as much as she does with the listener in the final verses of the song. And the poet surely recognized this potency of verbal images to conjure internal images when he urges his audience explicitly to do the same. Quote, "Jaidev's song evokes an image of Madhu's beautiful foe, fit for worthy men who keep the memory of Hari's feet in their hearts. Unquote. Radha's friend had probably used these verbal cues to graft the missing Krishna onto the scene, to imagine the devotional union that Radha fantasizes in the next song. Present as a listener, she offers silent comfort. And she is also an eyewitness, affirming what is mostly invisible as vitally real. As this figure of the female companion grew in Gaudiya theology, her role was articulated with increasing specificity for individual worshippers. The terracotta versions on Bishnupur's temple walls are perhaps visual articulations of such concerted thought and practice. The shrine below presents Radha and Krishna standing with feet on their ground, their bodies facing the viewer. Only their hands and the heads, now damaged, turn to each other, hinting at the intimate relationship that the viewer and the gopi no doubt knew well. They look much like icons used for worship in these temples. The gopi worshipper in the terracotta version looks on, as if absorbed in darshan at the threshold, hands folded in adoration. On the second floor, a similar scene presents the same three figures. Here, however, Radha and Krishna are seated in profile, their bodies intertwine, fitting snugly within the frame of the pavilion. Radha sits on his lap with legs folded back. Their faces reach to embrace, their hands to caress. This representation of the divine couple differs significantly from the icons. They seem immersed in each other, unaware either of the viewer or the mortal beholder standing in front of this temple facade. The gopi leans inward, as if acknowledging the intimacy and pleasure that makes it a space of devotional ecstasy with her reverential gesture. As an intercessory figure, this depicted gopi as devotee is key to bringing worshippers to the deity through the shared aspiration for access to the divine Leela. The two attending gopis on the two levels are hardly differentiated, sharing clothing, gesture, and posture, allowing us to interpret them possibly as the same person. Below, she is looking at the icons, transforming them through her gaze, emotional and imaginative activity, into the lovers above. We might interpret the lower iconic form of the divine as a potential catalyst, activated in private meditation or community practices of kirtan. The intensity of the devotional absorption connects these apparently distinct forms of the gods in the two shrines. Such a reading of the two scenes as continuous, moving from bottom upward, further suggests a possible strategy to visualize the Gaudiya premise of the simultaneously manifest and equally unmanifest. What is also unmanifest in visual form, but understood implicitly in the tradition, is that the gopi is no longer the same person, nor inhabiting the same body. She is irrevocably altered through the visual encounter. Practitioners surely knew well that the devotee gradually shed her mundane state of being to attain a perfected body to access the celestial realm. Such understanding of these figures would be consonant with Raganuga Bhakti, the imaginative practices of visualization to gain proximity to the divine by transforming oneself into a gopi. And the living community here, led by its spiritual leaders, surely understood such precedents. Detailed explorations of such figures and the specific guidelines for such practices were elaborately prescribed through the 17th century, including the transformation of the figure into a flower bud, the manjari. It is in this larger imaginative, devotional, and performative context that these reliefs can best be understood. Such figures materialize a sustained process, a theology and practice of delving deeper and deeper into the Bhagavata Puran Gopis, which the Gita Govinda had elevated, trusting her now with Radha's secrets of loss and longing. And she comes to embody the esoteric practices of the 17th century. If the temple entrance is dominated by these visualizations of bhakti yoga, secondary spaces such as the walls of the inner vestibule leading into the sanctum, or the blind doors on the outer walls of the sanctum, display sets of male ascetics, boiragi. Even if they don't preside at the main temple entrance, they remain proximate to the sanctum, sharing in the sacrality of the icons, even imbuing the divine with their energy. They are marked as mendicants by their flying matted locks, their bellies filled with prana. Some wear scant loincloths, others abandon even that trappings of material possession. Some display yoga straps and twist, while others manipulate breath and energy. The plurality of approaches signaled in this visual imagery and the mapping on the temple walls in relation to the organization of interior space suggests architectural attempts to shape and mediate the divergent needs of the various constituencies of this Krishna-loving community. And subsequent temples continue to make modifications. As a series, these adaptations can be recognized as a concern with the energy of yoga in its multiple iterations, or perhaps a mainstream attempt to harness but contain the potencies of asceticism. Thank you.